The winter of 1984 was the coldest anyone in Clackamas County, Oregon, could remember. Temperatures dropped to 15 below zero, snow piled up 6 feet deep in the mountains, and the logging operations shut down for 3 straight weeks because the equipment couldn't function in the extreme cold. My grandfather, James Thornton, ran a small family logging operation in the Cascade foothills, about 60 miles southeast of Portland. It wasn't one of the big corporate outfits that were clear-cutting thousands of acres. It was just him, my father Robert, my uncle Dale, and eventually me and my brothers when we got old enough to handle a chainsaw safely. We worked maybe 200 acres of timber that had been in our family since the 1920s. Selective cutting, sustainable practices, the kind of logging that worked with the forest instead of against it. My name is Jack Thornton, and I was 12 years old that winter when everything changed for our family, when we found something in the woods that would turn us from simple loggers into guardians of a secret so dangerous that it would eventually bring the federal government to our door 40 years later. It was February 14th, Valentine's Day, though nobody in our family paid much attention to holidays when there was work to be done. The cold snap had finally broken enough that Grandpa James decided we could get back into the woods and assess the damage from the storms. Trees had come down under the weight of ice and snow, and we needed to see what could be salvaged, what needed to be cleared, what the winter had cost us. I'd begged to come along even though I was too young to do real work. Grandpa had finally agreed, saying I could help mark trees and learn to read the forest. My father and uncle weren't happy about it, said it was too cold for a kid to be out there all day, but Grandpa overruled them. "The boy needs to learn the land," he'd said. "Can't do that, sitting by the fire." We headed out before dawn in Grandpa's old Ford pickup, the truck bed loaded with chainsaws, fuel, marking paint, and emergency supplies. The logging road was barely passable, snow packed down by our previous trips, but still treacherous, and it took us almost 2 hours to reach the section we wanted to check. The sun was just coming up when we parked and started hiking into the deeper woods, following old game trails and our own instincts about where the damage would be worst. We'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes when Uncle Dale stopped suddenly and held up his hand. The 3 of us froze, and that's when I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever encountered before. It was breathing, heavy and labored, coming from somewhere ahead of us in a thick stand of Douglas firs. But it wasn't the breathing of any animal I knew. It was too deep, too rhythmic, almost like a person, but not quite. Grandpa James pulled his rifle from his shoulder, not aiming it but holding it ready. We moved forward slowly, carefully, following the sound, and then we saw the blood. It was everywhere, splattered across the snow in patterns that told a story of violence and desperation. Dark red, almost black against the white, leading in a trail toward a massive fallen cedar that had created a natural shelter when it came down. The breathing was coming from under that fallen tree. Grandpa motioned for us to spread out, to approach from different angles. My father told me to stay back, to get behind a tree and not move no matter what happened. I did as I was told, pressing myself against the rough bark of a hemlock, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Grandpa called out, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Whatever you are, we're not here to hurt you. We're just checking our timber. If you're injured, we can help." The breathing stopped. Complete silence fell over the forest, that eerie quiet that comes when every living thing is holding its breath. Then, slowly, something moved under the fallen cedar. Something large. My father and uncle both raised their rifles, fingers on triggers but not firing, waiting to see what emerged. What came out from under that tree was impossible. It was a creature, but calling it that doesn't do justice to what we saw. It was easily 7.5 feet tall, even though it was hunched over, obviously injured, covered in dark brown fur, matted with blood and ice, arms that hung almost to its knees, shoulders broader than any human's, and a face that was simultaneously human and not human, with intelligent eyes that looked at us with an expression I recognized even at 12 years old. Fear, pain, and something else. Pleading. It was a female, we could see that clearly. And she was dying. She had injuries across her torso that looked like claw marks, deep gouges that were still bleeding despite the cold. One of her legs was bent at an angle that wasn't natural, clearly broken. And she was holding something against her chest, cradling it with both arms in a protective gesture that transcended species. Grandpa James lowered his rifle immediately. "Dale, Robert, lower your weapons, now. This isn't a threat. This is a mother protecting her young." My father and uncle slowly lowered their rifles, and we all stood there staring at this impossible creature, this thing that wasn't supposed to exist, this Sasquatch that every rational person said was just folklore and hoaxes. But here she was, real and bleeding and dying in the snow. Grandpa took a step forward, his hands out and empty. "I'm going to come closer," he said softly, speaking to her like he'd speak to a spooked horse. "I'm not going to hurt you or your baby. I just want to see how bad you're hurt." The creature watched him approach, her eyes never leaving his face, her arms tightening around whatever she was holding. When Grandpa got within 10 feet, she made a sound, a low vocalization that was part growl, part moan, part something else entirely. And then, slowly, deliberately, she held out what she'd been protecting. It was an infant, tiny compared to its mother, probably no more than a few months old, covered in lighter brown fur, its eyes closed, its small chest barely moving. The mother made that sound again, and this time I understood what it meant. She was asking for help. She knew she was dying, and she was asking us to save her baby. Grandpa James reached out and carefully, so carefully, took the infant from the mother's arms. It was so small in his large, work-roughened hands, so fragile. The mother watched him take her child, and I saw tears, actual tears, running down her face, freezing in her fur. She made one more sound, softer this time, and then she collapsed into the snow. Grandpa handed the infant to my father and knelt beside the mother, checking for a pulse for any sign of life. But she was gone. Whatever had attacked her, probably a cougar or possibly a bear defending a winter den, had done too much damage. She'd held on just long enough to find help for her baby, just long enough to pass her child to someone who might save it. We stood there in the snow, 3 grown men and a 12-year-old boy holding an infant Sasquatch and staring at the body of its mother, and nobody said anything for a long time. Finally, Uncle Dale spoke, his voice shaking. "James, what the hell do we do? We can't just leave her here, and we can't take that baby. If anyone finds out, if the government finds out, they'll swarm this place. They'll take the baby, they'll search every inch of these woods, they'll probably shut down our operation and take our land." Grandpa looked at the infant in my father's arms, then at the mother's body, then at each of us. "We're going to bury her," he said, deep and proper, with respect. "And we're going to take this baby home, and we're going to raise it, and we're going to keep it secret, because that's what she asked us to do with her last breath. That's the trust she placed in us. And we're not going to betray that trust. But James," my father said, "this isn't a puppy or a deer. This is something that science says doesn't exist. We don't know what it needs, how to care for it, what it will become. We don't know anything." "Then we'll learn," Grandpa said firmly. "We'll figure it out. But we're not abandoning this baby, and we're not turning it over to people who'll treat it like a specimen instead of a living being. This family has been working these woods for 3 generations. We know how to keep secrets. We know how to protect what's ours. And as of right now, this baby is ours." We spent the next 4 hours digging a grave in the frozen ground, using our axes and shovels to break through the ice and snow and earth. We buried the mother deep, covered her with rocks to keep scavengers away, and marked the spot with a cairn that looked natural, just another pile of stones in the forest. My father wrapped the infant in his jacket and held it against his chest to keep it warm. The baby made soft mewing sounds, but didn't cry, didn't struggle, just pressed against my father's warmth and held on. When we finally made it back to the truck, the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping again. Grandpa drove faster than was safe on those icy roads, and we made it back to the family compound, the cluster of houses and outbuildings where 3 generations of Thorntons lived and worked in half the time it had taken us to get out there. My grandmother Mary was waiting on the porch of the main house, worried because we'd been gone so long. When she saw my father carrying something wrapped in his jacket, she came down the steps quickly, her face concerned. "Robert, what happened? Is someone hurt?" My father unwrapped the jacket enough for her to see what he was carrying. Grandma Mary stopped dead, her hand going to her mouth, her eyes going wide. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered. "Is that what I think it is?" "It's a baby Sasquatch," Grandpa said. "Mother was killed, probably by a cougar. She gave us the baby before she died. We're going to raise it, Mary, here, in secret, and nobody outside this family can ever know." My grandmother looked at the infant, then at Grandpa, then at my father and uncle and me. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her thinking, weighing the implications, understanding what this would mean for all of us. Then she reached out and took the baby from my father's arms, cradling it against her chest with the practiced ease of a woman who'd raised 3 children of her own. "Well then," she said, "we'd better get it inside and warmed up. And someone needs to figure out what these creatures eat, because this baby is starving." That was how it started. That was the day the Thornton family became guardians of something impossible, protectors of a secret that would define the next 40 years of our lives. We named her Luna because she had a crescent-shaped marking on her forehead that looked like a moon. And we raised her as one of our own, hidden from the world, protected by a family of loggers who understood that some things were more important than laws or science or what society said was possible. We understood that sometimes the most important thing you can do is keep a promise to a dying mother, even if that mother wasn't human. Even if keeping that promise meant lying to everyone, meant living in constant fear of discovery, meant sacrificing normal life for something extraordinary. Luna became our responsibility, our secret, our family, and we protected her with everything we had for 40 years, until the day the federal government finally figured out what we'd been hiding in the forests of Oregon. The first year with Luna was the hardest, not because she was difficult, but because we were navigating completely unknown territory. None of us had any experience with primates, let alone with a species that wasn't supposed to exist. My grandmother Mary took charge of Luna's immediate care with the same practical competence she brought to everything. She set up a nursery in the back bedroom of the main house, the room that had been my father's when he was a child, and she treated Luna exactly like she'd treated her own babies. Feeding was the first challenge. Luna refused cow's milk, goat's milk, and every type of formula we tried. She'd turn her head away and make distress sounds, and we were terrified she'd starve before we figured out what she needed. It was my Aunt Sarah, Uncle Dale's wife, who finally solved it. She'd been reading everything she could find about great apes and primate nutrition, and she suggested we try a mixture of mashed fruits, nuts, and a special protein supplement used for rehabilitating wild animals. Luna took to it immediately, eating with desperate hunger that told us how close we'd come to losing her. She grew quickly, much faster than a human infant. By 6 months, she was the size of a 2-year-old human child. By a year, she was walking, climbing, and getting into everything with the curiosity and energy of a toddler. Her fur grew thicker and darker, and her features became more defined, that striking blend of human and something else that made her simultaneously familiar and alien. But it was her intelligence that amazed us most. Luna understood language almost from the beginning. By 18 months, she was responding to simple commands and questions. By 2 years, she understood complex sentences and could communicate her needs through a combination of gestures, vocalizations, and eventually sign language that my grandmother taught her using books from the library. The family compound became Luna's world, and we structured everything around keeping her hidden and safe. The compound consisted of 4 houses: the main house where Grandpa James and Grandma Mary lived, my parents' house, Uncle Dale and Aunt Sarah's house, and a smaller cabin that had belonged to my great-grandfather and now served as storage and workshop space. We were situated on 80 acres of forested land with no close neighbors, which gave us privacy but not complete security. We established strict rules that everyone in the family had to follow. Luna could only be outside at night or in the early morning before dawn. During the day, she stayed in the main house with the curtains drawn and the doors locked. When we had visitors, which was rare, Luna would hide in a specially constructed space under the main house, a root cellar that we'd expanded and made comfortable with blankets, toys, and books. She learned to be absolutely silent when strangers were near, understanding from a very young age that her safety depended on secrecy. My brothers and I grew up with Luna as our playmate and sister. There was me, Jack, the oldest at 12 when we found her. My brother Tom was 10, and my youngest brother Sam was 8. We were sworn to secrecy with a seriousness that made us understand this wasn't a game. Grandpa James sat us down that first week and explained that if anyone found out about Luna, men with guns would come and take her away, and we'd never see her again. He explained that she'd be locked in a cage, studied like a laboratory animal, that she'd spend her whole life being poked and prodded and treated like a thing instead of a person. We understood, and we never told anyone, not our friends at school, not our teachers, not anyone. Luna became the secret that bound our family together, the shared responsibility that made us closer than most families could ever be. As Luna grew, we had to adapt constantly. By age 5, she was stronger than any adult human, capable of lifting things that would take 2 grown men to move. We had to teach her to be gentle, to control her strength, especially around the younger kids. She learned quickly, becoming almost overly cautious, always careful not to hurt anyone accidentally. She was naturally nocturnal, which actually helped with keeping her hidden. She'd sleep during the day and be active at night, and that's when we'd take her into the forest, into the deep woods on our property where she could run and climb and be herself without fear of being seen. Those night walks became sacred time for our family. We'd all go together, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, kids, and Luna walking through the forest under the stars. Luna would climb trees with impossible speed and grace, would move through the undergrowth without making a sound, would communicate with us through soft hoots and gestures. She taught us things about the forest that we'd never known despite 3 generations of working these woods. She showed us which plants were edible, which animals were nearby based on scents we couldn't detect, how to move through the terrain without leaving traces. She had instincts and knowledge that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her genetic memory, abilities that her mother must have been teaching her before she died. By age 10, Luna was nearly 7 feet tall and still growing. She was also becoming more aware of what she was, of how different she was from us. She'd look at herself in the mirror, then look at us, and we could see her trying to understand why she didn't look like the family she loved. My grandmother sat her down one evening and told her the truth, or as much of the truth as we knew. She explained that Luna was a Sasquatch, that her mother had died protecting her, that we'd promised to keep her safe. She showed Luna books and documentaries about Bigfoot sightings and legends, and Luna absorbed it all with an intensity that was heartbreaking. She asked if there were others like her, if somewhere out there was a family of her own kind. We told her we didn't know, that we'd never seen evidence of others in our area, but that the forests of the Pacific Northwest were vast and full of mysteries. She asked if we could look for them, and we had to explain that searching would be dangerous, that it would draw attention to her, that the best way to protect her was to stay hidden. Luna accepted this, but we could see the loneliness in her eyes. And we loved her, but she knew she was different, knew she was alone in a way that none of us could truly understand. She was the only one of her kind in our world, and no amount of family love could completely fill that void. The teenage years were complicated in ways we hadn't anticipated. Luna experienced all the emotional turbulence of adolescence, the mood swings, the identity questions, the desire for independence, but she couldn't express it the way human teenagers could. She couldn't go to school, couldn't make friends outside the family, couldn't date or socialize or do any of the normal things that help young people figure out who they are. She became withdrawn for a while, spending more time alone in her room, less interested in the family activities that had always brought her joy. My grandmother worried constantly, and my mother spent hours sitting with Luna, just being present, letting her know she wasn't alone, even when she felt most isolated. It was my grandfather who finally reached her during that difficult period. He took her deep into the forest one night, just the two of them, and they didn't come back until dawn. When they returned, something had shifted. Luna seemed more settled, more at peace with herself. Grandpa never told us exactly what they'd talked about that night, but Luna later signed to me that he'd told her something important. He'd said that being different wasn't a curse, it was a responsibility. That she had abilities and perspectives that none of us had, and that made her valuable, not broken. He told her that family wasn't about being the same, it was about choosing to stand together despite differences, and he'd promised her that as long as any Thornton was alive, she'd have a home, and people who loved her exactly as she was. That conversation changed Luna. She came out of her shell, became more engaged with the family again, and started finding ways to contribute that used her unique abilities. She helped with the logging operation in ways no human could, moving through the forest at night to scout areas we were planning to work, identifying hazards and opportunities that we'd miss. She had an intuitive understanding of the forest ecosystem that made our sustainable logging practices even more effective. She could sense when a tree was diseased before we could see visible symptoms, could predict where erosion would be a problem, could identify the best paths for equipment that would minimize environmental impact. My father started calling her our forest consultant, and it wasn't a joke. Luna's insights made our operation more efficient and more ecologically sound than any of the big corporate logging companies. By the time Luna was 15, she was an integral part of the family business, even though her contributions had to remain invisible to the outside world. We'd go into the woods during the day to do the actual cutting and hauling, but our decisions about where and how to work were based on Luna's nighttime reconnaissance. Our timber was known for its quality, and our land remained healthy and productive while other operations were depleting their resources. People in the industry wondered how the Thorntons managed to be so successful with such a small operation, but they attributed it to generations of experience and good land management. They had no idea that our secret weapon was a Sasquatch with an encyclopedic knowledge of forest ecology. The years passed in a rhythm that felt almost normal, despite the extraordinary circumstances. Luna celebrated birthdays with us, learned to cook with my grandmother, watched movies with the family, played board games, and participated in every aspect of our lives that could be done safely within the compound. We documented everything in journals that my grandmother kept, detailed records of Luna's growth, her development, her health, her personality. We took thousands of photographs, always careful to keep them secure, never letting them be developed at commercial labs. My Uncle Dale, who was handy with electronics, set up a darkroom so we could process our own film. We created a complete archive of Luna's life, knowing that someday Somehow, this information might be important. When I turned 18 and graduated high school, I had to make a choice that every young person in our family faced. I could leave, go to college, pursue a life beyond the family compound and the logging operation. Or I could stay, commit to the family business, and more importantly, commit to protecting Luna for the rest of my life. My brothers and I all made the same choice. We stayed. Not because we felt obligated, but because Luna was our sister, and you don't abandon your sister just because protecting her is difficult. We all learned the logging trade, took over more responsibilities as Grandpa James and my father got older, and we all became part of the conspiracy of silence that kept Luna safe. By the time Luna was 20, our family had expanded. My brothers and I had gotten married, brought wives into the family who had to be told the secret and trusted to keep it. It was terrifying every time, revealing Luna's existence to someone new. But we were careful about who we married, choosing partners who shared our values, who understood the importance of family and loyalty. Every one of them accepted Luna without hesitation, welcomed her as a sister, and joined the protective circle around her. Luna became an aunt when my first daughter was born in 2004, and watching her with the baby was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. She was so gentle, so careful, holding my daughter with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. She'd sign to the baby, sing to her in her own unique vocalizations, and my daughter would calm immediately in Luna's arms. All of our children grew up with Aunt Luna, accepting her as naturally as they accepted any other family member. To them, having a Sasquatch in the family was just normal, just the way things were. The 2000s brought new challenges we hadn't anticipated. Technology was advancing rapidly, and the tools that had once been available only to government agencies were now accessible to civilians. Drones became common, and we'd occasionally spot them flying over our property, probably hobbyists or real estate surveyors, but each one was a potential threat. We installed detection systems that would alert us when drones were nearby, and Luna learned to hide immediately when the alarms went off. Satellite imagery became more detailed and more easily accessible. We had to be constantly aware of what our property looked like from above, had to make sure there was nothing visible that would raise questions. We built additional structures that looked like normal outbuildings, but were actually designed to give Luna more space to move around during the day without being visible from the air. Trail cameras became popular with hunters and wildlife enthusiasts, and we had to regularly sweep our property and the surrounding forest to find and disable cameras that people had placed without permission. We found dozens over the years, and each one represented a close call, a potential photograph that could have exposed Luna's existence. Social media made everything more dangerous. People were constantly posting about their outdoor adventures, sharing photos and videos from hiking and camping trips. We had to be hyper-vigilant about who was in the forests near our property, had to monitor social media for any posts that might show something they shouldn't. My nephew, who was good with computers, set up alerts for keywords like Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Clackamas County, and various location names near our property. We'd review every post, every photo, looking for anything that might be a threat. Despite all our precautions, there were close calls. In 2008, a group of Bigfoot researchers set up camp about 2 miles from our property, doing a week-long investigation based on some reported sightings in the area. We had to keep Luna inside the entire time, and we could hear them at night, doing their calls and knocks, trying to attract a Sasquatch. Luna wanted to respond, wanted to reach out to these people who were looking for her kind, but we couldn't let her. It was heartbreaking, watching her listen to those calls and having to stay silent. In 2012, a documentary crew came to the area filming a show about Bigfoot in the Pacific Northwest. They interviewed locals, including some of our family members, asking if we'd ever seen anything unusual in the woods. We all said no, played the role of skeptical loggers who didn't believe in such nonsense, while Luna hid in the underground space we'd built, listening to strangers talk about her kind like they were myths and legends. Each year brought new technology, new threats, new reasons to be paranoid, but we adapted, we evolved our security measures, and we kept Luna safe. By 2020, Luna was 36 years old, fully mature, standing nearly 8 feet tall and weighing probably 600 pounds. She was magnificent, powerful, intelligent, and still completely hidden from the world. She'd spent her entire life within the boundaries of our 80 acres, never traveling more than a few miles from the compound, never meeting another of her kind, never experiencing true freedom. And we could see the toll it was taking. She was becoming more melancholy, spending long hours sitting at the edge of the forest, looking out at the mountains in the distance, at the vast wilderness she could never explore. She'd signed to us about dreams she had, dreams of running through endless forests, of climbing mountains, of finding others like her. She never complained, never blamed us for the limitations of her life, but we could see the sadness in her eyes, the longing for something more. My grandfather had passed away in 2015, and my grandmother followed in 2018. Before she died, Grandma Mary made us all promise that we'd continue protecting Luna, that we'd never give up on her, never turn her over to authorities no matter what happened. We promised, and we meant it. But we were also starting to realize that we couldn't hide her forever. The world was getting smaller, technology was getting better, and eventually someone would find out. We started making contingency plans, discussing what we'd do if Luna was discovered, how we'd protect her legally, whether we should proactively reveal her existence on our own terms rather than waiting to be exposed. But before we could make any decisions, before we could take any action, the choice was taken away from us. In March 2024, 40 years after we'd found Luna as an infant in the snow, the federal government came knocking on our door. And everything we'd built, everything we'd protected, everything we'd sacrificed for 4 decades was suddenly at risk. The signs had been there for months, but we'd missed them, or maybe we'd chosen not to see them because acknowledging them would mean admitting that our time was running out. It started with increased air traffic over our property, small planes and helicopters that seemed to circle our area more frequently than normal. Then there were the strangers in town, people asking questions about the Thornton family, about our logging operation, about whether we'd ever seen anything unusual in the woods. My brother Tom had been approached by someone claiming to be a journalist, writing a story about sustainable logging practices, but the questions had been oddly specific, focusing more on our property layout and our family structure than on our forestry methods. We tightened security, kept Luna inside more, increased our vigilance, but we hadn't realized how much they already knew, how long they'd been watching us, how thoroughly they'd built their case before making their move. It was a Wednesday morning, March 13th, 2024, when they came. I was at the main house, having coffee with my father and my brothers, discussing the day's work schedule, when we heard the vehicles. Multiple vehicles coming up our private road fast. We all moved to the windows and saw what we'd been dreading for 40 years. Black SUVs, at least 6 of them, and behind them, larger vehicles that looked like mobile command centers. They weren't trying to be subtle or stealthy. This was a show of force, a demonstration that they had the numbers and the authority, and they weren't going to be denied. Luna was upstairs in her room, and I saw my father's face go pale as he realized she wouldn't have time to get to the hiding space. We'd practiced emergency protocols hundreds of times, but this was happening too fast, too overwhelming. The vehicles stopped in front of the main house, and armed agents in tactical gear poured out, at least 30 of them, taking positions around all the buildings in the compound. A woman in a dark suit stepped out of the lead SUV, and even from a distance I could see the badge on her belt and the absolute confidence in her posture. She knew exactly what she was here for, and she knew we couldn't stop her. My father opened the front door before they could knock, stepping out onto the porch with his hands visible and empty. "I'm Robert Thornton," he said, his voice steady despite the fear I knew he was feeling. "This is private property. What's this about?" The woman in the suit approached the porch, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Thornton, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Martinez with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, operating under joint authority with the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. We have multiple warrants to search this property and all structures on it, and we have reason to believe you and your family are harboring an unidentified cryptid species in violation of federal law. I need you to cooperate fully and tell me where it is." My father didn't flinch, didn't look toward the house, didn't give anything away. "I don't know what you're talking about. We're a logging family. We don't have any exotic animals." Agent Martinez pulled out a tablet and held it up so my father could see the screen. It showed thermal imaging, clearly our property, with heat signatures for all the buildings. And in the main house, there was a signature that was distinctly larger and hotter than the human signatures around it. "We've been monitoring this property for 8 months, Mr. Thornton. We have thermal imaging showing an anomalous heat signature consistent with a large primate. We have audio recordings of vocalizations that don't match any known species. We have testimony from multiple sources who've reported unusual activity on and around your property over the past 4 decades. And we have purchasing records showing that your family has been buying quantities of food far exceeding what your documented household size would require." She lowered the tablet and looked at my father with an expression that wasn't hostile, but was absolutely determined. "We know it's here, Mr. Thornton. We know you've been hiding it for a very long time. The only question now is whether you're going to cooperate or whether we're going to have to take this property apart piece by piece until we find it." I stepped out onto the porch beside my father, and my brothers followed. We stood together, a united front, the way we'd always stood when it came to protecting Luna. "If there's something here," I said, "and I'm not saying there is, but if there was, what would happen to it? Would it be treated humanely? Would it have rights? Or would it be locked in a cage and studied like a lab animal?" Agent Martinez looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been sympathy. "Mr. Thornton, I understand this is difficult. But we're talking about a potentially unknown species, something that could revolutionize our understanding of human evolution and primate development. If such a creature exists, it needs to be studied by scientists, protected under federal law, and properly cared for by people with expertise in cryptozoology and primate behavior. Your family, despite your good intentions, is not equipped to provide appropriate care for something like this. She's not something," a voice said from behind us. "She's someone, and we've been providing appropriate care for 40 years. We all turned to see Luna standing in the doorway. She'd come down on her own, made the choice to reveal herself rather than hide while we faced this threat alone. She stood there in the morning light, 8 feet of impossible reality, and every agent in the compound froze, staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe to fear. Luna stepped out onto the porch, moving slowly and deliberately, her hands visible and non-threatening. She looked at Agent Martinez and signed, her hands moving in clear, precise gestures. "My name is Luna. The Thornton family saved my life when I was an infant. They raised me, educated me, loved me, and protected me. I am not a specimen to be studied. I am a person with thoughts, feelings, and rights, even if your laws don't recognize them. I will cooperate with you because I don't want my family to be hurt. But I want you to understand that if you take me away from them, you're not rescuing me. You're kidnapping me." Agent Martinez stared at Luna, her professional composure cracking for just a moment. "It can communicate," she said softly. "It understands language. It's signing." My father said firmly, "She understands language. She's signing. Her name is Luna, and she's our daughter. We found her 40 years ago when her mother was killed. We made a promise to that dying mother that we'd protect her baby, and we've kept that promise every single day since." Agent Martinez recovered her composure and pulled out her phone, speaking quickly to someone on the other end. "We need the linguistics team and the primate behavior specialists here immediately, and get me a direct line to Director Chen. This situation just became significantly more complicated than we anticipated." She looked back at Luna. "Luna, I'm Agent Martinez. I need you to understand that you're not in danger from us. We're not going to hurt you. But there are procedures we have to follow, protocols for handling a discovery of this magnitude. I need you to come with us voluntarily so we can ensure your safety and begin proper documentation and assessment." Luna looked at my father, then at me and my brothers, then at the rest of the family who'd come out of the other houses, drawn by the commotion. 3 generations of Thorntons stood there, all of us ready to fight for her if necessary, all of us terrified of what was about to happen. She signed to us, her movements slow and deliberate so everyone could understand. "I love you all. You gave me everything. You kept me safe when the world would have destroyed me. But I think it's time. I think I need to do this, not just for me, but for any others of my kind who might be out there. If I cooperate, if I show them that we're intelligent and deserving of respect, maybe it will change how they treat my species. Maybe it will lead to protection instead of exploitation." My father's eyes filled with tears. "Luna, you don't have to do this. We can fight this. We have lawyers, we have resources. We can make this a legal battle that will take years. You don't have to go with them. The facility is in Montana, a federal wildlife research center that has the security and resources to handle a situation like this. I can give you the address, and we can arrange regular visitation schedules. But you need to understand that there will be restrictions, security protocols, media blackouts. This is going to be the biggest cryptozoological discovery in history, and we need to control how that information gets released." We spent the next hour negotiating terms, making sure Luna's rights were protected as much as possible, given the unprecedented situation. Finally, as the sun began to set, it was time for Luna to leave. The specialized transport vehicle was essentially a large, comfortable, mobile habitat, climate-controlled and equipped with everything Luna might need for the journey. It wasn't a cage exactly, but it wasn't freedom either. Luna hugged each family member one more time. When she got to my father, she held him for a long moment, and I heard her make a sound she'd only made a few times in her life, a deep, mournful vocalization that was unmistakably grief. My father whispered something to her that I couldn't hear, and she nodded against his shoulder. Then she climbed into the transport vehicle, turned to look at us one last time through the reinforced glass window, and signed a simple message. "I love you. Thank you for everything." The convoy pulled away slowly, kicking up dust on our private road, and we stood there watching until the last vehicle disappeared from sight. 40 years of protection, of secrecy, of sacrifice, and it had ended in a single day. The aftermath was chaos. Within 24 hours, the story had leaked to the media, despite the government's attempts at containment. Our property was swarmed by news crews, curiosity seekers, Bigfoot enthusiasts and protesters, arguing about everything from Luna's rights to whether she should be released into the wild to whether the government had the authority to take her in the first place. We hired lawyers, the best we could afford, and they filed motions arguing for Luna's personhood status, for her right to choose where she lived, for our family's right to maintain custody of a being we'd raised for 4 decades. The legal battle became a national sensation, with ethicists and scientists and legal scholars all weighing in on questions that had never been asked before. Was Luna a person or an animal? Did she have constitutional rights? Could she be held against her will? Who had the authority to make decisions about her life? The case went all the way to federal court, and in a landmark decision in August 2024, Judge Patricia Whitmore ruled that Luna possessed sufficient cognitive ability, self-awareness, and capacity for autonomous decision-making to be granted limited personhood status under the law. She couldn't vote or own property, but she had the right to legal representation, the right to refuse medical procedures, and most importantly, the right to choose where and with whom she lived. Luna chose to return home. In September 2024, 6 months after she'd been taken, Luna came back to the family compound. She was accompanied by a team of scientists who'd been working with her, and they reported that she'd been cooperative, fascinating, and had taught them more about primate cognition and communication than decades of traditional research. But they also reported that she'd been deeply unhappy, that despite comfortable conditions and respectful treatment, she'd been depressed and withdrawn, clearly grieving for her family. The government established new protocols. Luna would remain with our family, living on our property, but with regular check-ins from federal wildlife officials. Our land was designated as a protected habitat, with legal guarantees that it couldn't be seized or developed. Luna would participate voluntarily in research studies, but only on her terms, only when she chose to, and always with the right to refuse. And most importantly, the case established legal precedents for how any other Sasquatch discovered in the future would be treated, not as animals to be captured and studied, but as sentient beings with rights and agency. Luna is 36 years old now, and she's still with us, still part of our family. The secret is out, but in a way that's freed all of us. Luna can go outside during the day now. She can walk in the forest without fear. She still can't leave the property without security escorts, and she still deals with the burden of being the only confirmed Sasquatch in human custody, but she has her family, her home, and her freedom within the boundaries we've established. Sometimes late at night, I see her standing at the edge of the forest, looking out at the mountains, and I know she's still wondering if there are others out there, still hoping that someday she might find her own kind. We've used our platform, the attention that Luna's case brought, to advocate for habitat protection in the Pacific Northwest, hoping that if there are others, they'll have safe places to live undisturbed. My name is Jack Thornton, and my family hid a Sasquatch for 40 years. When the federal government finally discovered our secret, we thought we'd lose her forever. But instead, we helped establish that beings like Luna deserve respect, rights, and the freedom to choose their own path. She chose us, she chose family, and that choice, made freely and legally recognized, means more than 40 years of hiding ever could. Some secrets are worth keeping, but some truths are worth fighting for. Luna taught us both.